Hey, this is Deji.
And Chris.
Welcome to the Lot1 Podcast. On today's episode, we talk with Jens Jacob about fast-tracking your filmmaking journey and starting a tech company called Saturation.io. Let's get into it. Hey everybody, welcome to the Lot1 Podcast. I'm your host, Deji Bancole, and today we have a guest on that is doing a lot of cool things, which we will get into. This is Jens Jacob. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, such a pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
So for the people at home who don't know who you are yet, do you mind giving us a quick backstory?
Yeah, where to begin? I'm a producer. I started about 15, 16 years ago. Back when I was in Tampa, Florida, I would do little video gigs here and there, graphic design, motion graphics, you name it. I was a creative at heart. I just loved any kind of form of creating. That kind of quickly evolved into working for the Tampa Bay Lightning, which is the hockey team out there, and which turned into a job with ESPN and so on. It progressed pretty quickly. But I tell people all the time, at the time at least, it was still very major markets. Like you go to LA, New York, or Miami to, live the dream and make it in entertainment. And in Tampa, it was basically like sports and news. And actually, funny enough, I know it's like a sin probably to say, but I wasn't very interested in sports, but I had one of the coolest jobs to anybody else at the time, I think. But yeah, I just decided that LA was like the best place to go. And weirdly enough, I chose it because I thought it was going to be the hardest. I know it seems the most natural, but I kind of took an opposite approach to it. I thought it was going to be the hardest because it was hardest that it was going to actually force me to kind of go into like fight or flight mode. And my thesis at the time was like, it's either I make it or I live in a box. Like I wasn't going to come back home, or I wasn't going to, that was just kind of like my thought. So there was just like more fire, I guess. Went to LA, didn't know a single soul. The story goes that I slept on a couch for like the first year or two, I think, of being out in LA, working for free. I didn't really have a network or like a degree in filmmaking or anything like that. I just kind of went out there out on a whim and started kind of building relationships and networking and getting on sets, just offering services for free just to kind of, hop on a set. And that quickly paid off. And I went from PAing to producing in I think 6 months. And it really just came down to, I was involved with a lot of short form productions like music videos and commercials, and it was kind of easy and quick to go from one to the other. And I kind of just quickly build my skill sets from there, and was just always kind of hungry for the next one and kind of building on top of that. And I went on to do music videos, commercials. I've been a part of teams that have done stuff for Google and Huggies and you name it, like just random brands. Started my own production company, and it was largely a commercial slash branded content company. And then in 2017, it kind of converted into Sypher Studios, which was our feature doc slash feature film division of the company, and we put more emphasis and focus on that, and we were doing a lot of large scale docs through that. And it's kind of led me all the way to now a new journey around investments into projects, as well as starting my own startup. And yeah, that's kind of the short of it. I can kind of double click into any particular place, but I just wanted to kind of paint the quick 5-minute picture, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. I do want to go back a little bit into, because I think one of the things that is sometimes perplexing for me, how people get from, not perplexing, I just have a lot of questions about how people go from, just starting out, either not knowing anybody, like you said, like yourself, to becoming that producer, right? And what were some of the key steps and maybe some of the mindset that you had as you were starting up and getting those roles, and then also transitioning from being a PA to the next role, and then eventually a producer, because you did it pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying, I don't know if there's any one thing, but if I can kind of synthesize a couple things that really helped me. And what's beautiful about film production is there's not just one way. Like a lot of different industries, there's like a clear defined path to like how you get into it, right? You get into university and then you do the internship or the fellowship or whatever it is, and then you get the job or whatever. And like I said, I didn't go to film school or anything like that, so I didn't quite have that background or network to kind of just get me my first couple gigs. I think working in Tampa and having had local experience around like what freelancing meant gave me a leg up by the time I went to LA. And 10, 15 years ago, it was still kind of centralized. I think now it's a little bit more decentralized that you could do a lot of this anywhere, but I can speak for myself that I felt like I did need to move to LA. But when I moved to LA, I felt like I didn't really tell people my history or background or my experience in anything. I just kind of showed up, and it didn't matter like how low of a position it was. Like I just started PAing and interning even though I was like DPing and gaffing and all that stuff in Florida. I just didn't really have a chip on my shoulder. I think that I was just like, you know what, I'm hungry, I want to learn, I want to be on bigger sets, and I'll do whatever it takes. And I think it's this partial like humbling yourself that like, hey, you might need to take a couple steps back in pay, position, role, whatever it might be, to learn, to gain something else other than maybe the monetary value that you think you deserve or you think that like, you want to have. And I think I knew at the time, at least in freelancing, there's this whole thing about networking. It's about like who you know, but you kind of have to flip it. It's who knows you.
Mm.
And if you don't really make some sort of leave a mark with somebody, there's no real kind of reason for them to think about you the next time that they are doing a job or hiring somebody or whatever it is. It's not like I'm going out and reaching out saying like, "Hey, I'm available. Can you like hire me?" It's typically producers like, they get a job awarded and like pretty quickly they have to staff it up and they have to like find who's available, who's memorable, who they know that they can trust, and who they can essentially within a short amount of time be able to make a quick decision on like this is the right person for the job. And as a PA, you're not special, so it's not necessarily that like you're the best PA ever. I mean, I'm sure there are really great PAs. I'm not trying to say anything about that, but I think my hunger led to a lot of like noticeability in terms of Gents was going to go above and beyond what was asked of him. And I think if I synthesize that even further, what makes a really great producer is problem solving. And I could say that's true about any particular like, area of or role. Like if you can be self-sufficient in what you're doing, you don't have to necessarily keep bugging somebody else, for where you can be, I guess, like self-sufficient. I want to say that it's this mix of, I'd like to say for me, it was right timing, hard work, and then a hustle or drive that like I kind of maybe mix all this in together, this hustle, drive, problem solving all together. It's like it's the things that I think make great producers. And I think that's really what you want to hire. You want to hire people that are around you that are going to be self sufficient, that are going to be able to take. I always say, as a producer, my role and job should be trying to hire every other department and every other division, somebody that's better than I or more talented than I, or I should be the dumbest one on set. I
Mm.
should be the least of these, like, on set. And if I did that, then I knew I did my job right. And I think having that freelance experience did kind of maybe sharpen some of those like knives for me, that by the time I was in LA, I think I had a real leg up than maybe the other person that was probably at the same level or role.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm.
You, I have to say, I've never thought about it in the way that you just said of like, you should network, but you should be, the person they think about, when they need a role or something pops up or something. And because I feel like, even on this podcast, a lot of people say it's like, it's who you know. Go network, go talk to people, go hang out. But what does that mean? You know what I mean? Like, if you go meet with someone, but you don't leave an impression, or that person just says no or just ghosts you, what does that say about you? You're not, like, even though you're doing that thing where you're sending emails out and you're trying to have conversations, ultimately, does it matter if
Right.
they didn't think about you? So such a valuable thing that you said there that I'm surprised like no one's ever brought up on the pod, especially because like it's just so true. It's just so true. You know, because I've been doing a lot of go ahead.
I was just going to say to kind of enhance the point, I think the framing is fundamentally flawed. When you say networking, you kind of inherently think of it as, what is that person going to do for me? Or what am I going to get out of this? And the reason why I'm trying to flip it into this idea of like, you know, how do you leave a mark? It's how do you show value to somebody else? It's not necessarily what I can get out of it, but what can I give you that provides value? And at the time it was, hey, I don't need money. I want to help you. I want to learn. I want to understand. And that positioning inherently, nobody's gonna say no to a free PA. I'm not saying work for free completely for the rest of your life or anything, but I'm just talking about that initial unlock or that barrier, whatever it might be, to get somebody coffee or to what is that value that you're unlocking, as small as it is, or maybe just as minuscule as it could be in the beginning. I think it shows for something, and I think you're building currency and you're building the relationship to be more value driven than what do I get out of it. And I think that's the difference between the who you know versus who knows you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No,
Wow.
that I think that's really great. And as soon as you said it, I was like, you know, you always like try to. I just thought that when you said it, that is something that I'm probably going to remember because it's so simple that it's like, wow, like that's pretty good.
Do you feel like,
thank you.
Like with today's climate, both in the industry and outside the industry, that is as easy now, or do you think it is harder now to I'm essentially saying like working for free, doing these like networking things, or like taking a step back and down? Like imagine if you came from Florida today and you did the same thing. Like obviously it depends on everyone's financial situation and how old they are and like stuff like that, but like do you feel like that is as easy to do or as valuable to do now, or do you feel like since the climate is changing and everything is kind of on fire right now, that is still the best way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you should know your own situation and obviously take care of yourself first. And so it's not like a blanket statement. I understand that different people are in different positions. I was lucky at the time. I was 19, had no responsibilities, had no dependencies, and I could make those types of decisions, right? Like, and so I encourage it, especially when you're young.
Yeah.
Like you have no excuse at that level to say that, like, you know, I can't, or, you know, I need to do this, or I you know, I'm valuable and I need to like make sure that I exert my worth and like all this stuff. I hear the excuses, and I would say yes, it's still as important and relevant now when talking about that value generation. It doesn't always look like working for free, so it might look different for you than it looked different for me, and it could be it could be you know, maybe not like necessarily going on set for free or anything like that, but something that could. And the cool thing about PAing, or at least at that level, at least at the commercial level or at the music video level, it was one day.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, hey, I'm working for free I did end up working for free for 3 months, but it's not necessarily always like this long-term commitment.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Necessarily, like, and it's actually really fun. Actually, just the other day I was talking to one of the producers that did initially like hire me for free, and I was just like, you know, it was my first time ever being on an indie film set, and it's so crazy to me that we still like keep in somewhat connect or like in touch, even though that was like 10-15 years ago. It's led to some incredible things. It's now turned into a different relationship because of my new, like, you know, software platform. So yeah, like you just never know where some of that will go, and it's not always an immediate. It's why the framing matters, not just the action.
Yeah.
The framing is, I'm creating and generating value for you, and at some point I know it's either going to be valuable for now or for later or at some point. And so inherently, if you are if you are just thinking that way and you're operating and you're creating and you're hustling, it has to be paired with those things too, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't just do one without the other, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think that's what like freelance life has prepared me for, is like you are constantly hustling. I didn't even know where 2 weeks ahead of my schedule, like what I was going to be doing,
Yeah.
or who I was going to be working with or anything like that. So it's a constant hustle.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to mix the value generation creation, and that could look like paid value generation too, right? Even when you are working on set, or you're a DP, or you're a gaff, or whatever it is, if you do the bare minimum at any job, you are not the most memorable you're probably memorable for the wrong reason.
Yeah. Right.
And so
Yeah.
it's like, how do you generate value no matter where you're at? You should always exceed whatever values, the table stakes in terms of monetary value or whatever it might be. You should always be positioning yourself as they want me around, and providing value, and I'm exceeding the value of like whatever the current, that paper, that paycheck, or whatever it might be, should be the bare minimum of whatever it is.
Yeah.
And from a producer's perspective, you never know who's going to turn into the founder of a software that's, breaking industry standards. You know what I mean? Like, you ultimately don't know
Never
your
know.
effect that you have on those people. Not saying like you should, if you could pay people, you should pay people. But we've all been in those, like,
100%.
especially in low budget, where like it's just like realistically you can't. But the hope is that that can catapult to the next thing, and then you could pay them, right? Like that. Ultimately, that's the goal. As filmmakers, we have all worked for free at some point. But it's
there's
so
definitely bad actors there, but most of my experience has been, if they can pay you, they would.
Yes.
Most of the time you see that it's like everybody kind of at the same place. It's very rare that like somebody's just inherently taking advantage of you. There are those people, excuse me, but I feel like more times than not, people are trying to get things off the ground, and there are obviously there's people where it's their job day in, day out, and that's a very different story. I'm very specifically talking to the person that's trying to get their foot into the door.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is what I would say.
Yeah, I definitely agree with, all of it. So I kind of wanted to sort of fast forward a little bit to, you're working as a full-time producer, starting the company. You were a part of the company Sypher, right? And you were making, features, documentary, narrative. What can you kind of walk us through? Like, how did that start? Like, how did you get involved with that company, start that company, and then what was the impetus to? Because you said you changed a little bit, like you started focusing on one specific kind of part of the business, right?
Yeah. When I started the company, it was more short form. What was interesting was like there was two parts that I think we were like more known for, was our narrative short films, and one of them particularly at the time was like a huge accomplishment for the entire team as well as like us as a company. And it just kind of just was like a huge calling card, I think, just to kind of show like, hey, you didn't need a lot to kind of put together like this really high quality like film, and it really was on the backs of like a lot of passion and passionate people and hungry individuals. And so I'm forever grateful for that film experience, as well as like some of the short films that we were able to do. And it's weird. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I don't think most people get into like commercials or music videos initially thinking that that's what they were going to do for the rest of their lives. Like, I think for me at the time, it was always a stepping stone. And so it was something that I knew that I could do with the little that I had, and so on. And so I think we always have dreamt of, what does the feature version of this look like? I didn't come from the studio world. I didn't like have that kind of experience. And so it kind of felt like, I was going to work my way from making these types of like smaller projects or commercials that had funding behind it and was able to like allow us to craft or to hone our craft. And I think that is what it did. I think it really helped build my muscle for what production just looked like, generally speaking. There's obviously different containers for what production can be, whether that's a feature film, TV, commercial, documentary, VR now, and so on. And the leap was not easy. I think how it initially started for us was my partner and I, at the time, we weren't doing the same things. I was running this commercial company that was also slightly doing production services for other companies that just really needed a quick way to like turn on that part of that company. And I got connected when this group was trying to get a documentary off the ground, and they were trying to shoot like a whole like narrative short inside of the doc. It was the first time it's now very common, but it was the first time that I had ever seen this hybrid narrative doc kind of movement where it wasn't just like, when you think of doc inherently, you think low quality, you think handy cam, you think like, just like, but what they were trying to, when I saw what they had filmed for the doc, and at the time it was also weirdly unheard of, like they were shooting it on reds, and like it was just like, oh my gosh, like this isn't like the VHS version of doc. It was like amazing to see the doc that they were putting together, and they had already filmed a lot of the interview parts, and they were just about to shoot this whole like narrative sequence in Hawaii, and they needed kind of production support around that. And that's how I met my now co-founder in Sypher Studios and my partner in Sypher Studios. And we met initially as we always joke around or laugh about it, because we met initially as a negotiation, because he was on one end of on one side of the aisle and I was on the other, and we were negotiating terms and all this stuff. And it was one of the most memorable, to go back to memorability, it was one of the most memorable negotiations, because usually in a negotiation, what's the word I'm looking for? Usually in a negotiation, it's inherently selfish, because you are looking out for the best interest of yourself, right? Absolutely, and that's what a negotiation is, right? Like if we were negotiating, you would be looking out for your company and I'd be looking out for my company. And this was one of the few times that the negotiation felt the opposite. It was inherently out of generosity. And he was telling me what more that he felt like he wanted to like help me achieve out of the partnership, and vice versa. Like I had at the time a production services company, a camera rental house, and like all these drone company. And I was like a part of all these things. And I was like, hey, I want to bring all these to the table. I don't want to necessarily like nickel and dime you for all of this stuff. And it eventually just turned into this like really awesome partnership for that film. And it was my first kind of foray into kind of getting into the feature landscape of things. And I learned a lot, and kind of through that process, I became more involved because I was just so passionate about what these guys were doing, and we came as a formal like co-production on the film. And that's really, I think, what started the feature side of the company. We ended up partnering out of that film. That became the first film, but then we did 6 films after that together so far in this new venture. And it was kind of, that was like the early starts of it. I don't even know if that answers your question, but that was the genesis of it.
That's great.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Today's episode is brought to you by Saturation.io. Saturation is a modern, cloud-based budgeting and expense management platform built specifically for filmmakers, producers, and production teams. Designed by industry professionals, it helps streamline financial workflows for films, TV shows, commercials, and so much more. With real-time collaboration features, customizable budget templates, and automated expense tracking, Saturation eliminates the need for clunky spreadsheets and outdated software. It supports seamless imports from tools like Movie Magic and offers powerful insights and controls without that learning curve. So, whether you're managing a small indie film or a multi-million-dollar production, Saturation gives you clarity, accuracy, and control all in one place. With a free tier available and proven for use by producers across all budgets, there has never been a better time to experience the next generation of production finance. Click the link in the description to get started today. All right, let's get back to the show. I'm curious, because being a freelance producer, that's one element of it. And you're looking for jobs, and you're bidding, and you're trying to get jobs. But then, how did you make the decision to even start a production company for yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say inherently, I felt like as a kid, I had a very entrepreneurial heart and spirit. I don't fully know where it all comes from. It's not like my parents were business people or anything like that. I was the kid in middle school that like went to the dollar store and bought a candy bar and then sold it for $2 at lunch. Like that was just inherently like how I felt like I operated. So I think I always knew there was like a business side of this that I loved, and I loved getting to know and understand. And there's a creativity and an art to business as well. And I think that's what the beauty of producing was for me, that it kind of blended these two worlds together. So I think I've always wanted to, but why it specifically happened at the time that it did was I started working for a production company more at a full-time role, and it ended up turning into a negative experience where very high kind of stress and anxiety induced environment. The culture wasn't like really set properly there, and faced a lot of burnout. And I never had anxiety attacks before that was like the first time that I think I developed it. And it was one of those weird things that like it paid you a lot of money, so that's why you stayed. If there was an abusive relationship, I felt like that was kind of it in a weird way. Like I didn't even
Yeah.
know what to expect, and so that's why it was hard to leave. And then I eventually left because it was just too much, and I was just like, you know what, I'm kind of over this. And I knew at that point that's when I wanted to start like my version of like what I think a company should be if I were to like do
Mm.
it differently, or or just be kind of more so like that there wasn't going to be somebody else that created that environment for me. Because part of freelance is you don't know, right? Like you're on new
Yeah.
teams every single time, and I'm not perfect, I'm not always going to get it right either, but I just knew that there was something better. And it was kind of interesting because at the time I went from like high profile like commercials to like short docs and like short films and stuff like that. So it was definitely the opposite trajectory
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
my career, but I've never had felt more fulfilled
Mm.
doing what I did. And I felt like I took this weird turn from what I initially thought I was going to do, which was like, be a part of like films and make a difference within storytelling. And then I was like doing like commercial work, and not even like it was like selling Mophie batteries, and like it's just like, what was the
Yeah.
point? Like it
Right.
wasn't. So yeah, I think that was the catalyst to then feel like I could start my own production company. And that's where we did Anomaly, our first short film, and it kind of just like kind of snowballed into to different various works through the banner of Sypher. And yeah, that's kind of how it initially started.
That's awesome. It's it's interesting journeys how we, you never really know what your career path is going to look like, and you never know what it's going to look like after, like you think you know it, but then something could happen and it's just completely
Yeah,
different.
you might even completely get out of film and
Don't say
still
that.
talk to filmmakers.
Don't say that.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit more about this newer company that you've started. Do you mind talking about Saturation?
Yeah. So kind of as we're kind of skirting around it, I have since formally left producing as like a main role or a title. It's still very much in my heart, and I say this in the deepest level of, I feel like I'm a producer through and through, and now I feel like I'm just a producer to producers.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is, a producer inherently is the problem solver of the set. If I did my job right as a producer, 9 times out of 10, I should be doing nothing on set, other than like putting out fires and stuff like that, because you've kind of set it up in a way that hopefully everything is running in a way that it's independent. And the last 15 years has just been some lows and highs, but like a lot of the lows came from the frustrations of around systems that we've had to use, and how inherently you look at the film industry and you think of that as a very progressive industry, and filmmaking isn't necessarily progressive. Is the weird part. You'll see a lot of progression maybe in post-production and technology being used in maybe like siloed ways inside of the film industry, but barely when it came to pre-production and production, or at least largely like what I had to deal with as a producer. And so Saturation inherently is a budgeting and production management tool for producers, production companies, creators that just want to even have their own kind of productions, a production in a box, if you will. But it starts with the core of what I felt like every production of mine was, which was the budget. That was like inherently the Bible of what I did. And there was a lot of offshoots of how that all tied in with all the various levels of production management. But that was the big unlock, that this was the core of it. And I can create tools around this thing to help automate and systemize things for producers and production companies to help them move faster. Very often you're moving as fast as your financial systems allowed you to move. Because every other place I could kind of just like, start to roll and show up and whatever. But like, if this part wasn't taken care of, especially at larger scale production, if you're managing $10,000 or more, and saturation helps the short film that's $10,000, and it can help the feature film that's $50 million. Like, you can kind of do it all in one place, which I had never really seen before. Even when I was a producer, because I was touching so many different types of productions, I was using almost a different tool for the type and scale of the production. If I was doing a commercial production, I was using one system. If I was doing a feature film, I was using another system. And I was like, this feels so fundamentally wrong, because at its core, it should be the same thing. Yes, there are some differences, but why can't I do everything in one place? Was kind of the
Yeah.
initial, like, okay, I want to figure this out. I want to deep dive. I want to research. I want to understand how to build the ultimate production management tool. And it started with budgeting for us.
So if it started with budgeting, where is it at now? What are some other features?
Yeah, so the core of it is collaborative budgeting. And so if you think of it as like a Google Sheets meets Movie Magic, much more easier to use, intuitive. The big unlock with the collaboration side is that now department heads can kind of come in. There's multiple levels of collaboration that you could have that doesn't require spreadsheets and all the different things that people might be using to break down their projects and to break down their budgets. And more recently, we've gotten into payments and banking, where you can actually set up an entire project inside of saturation, run all the like financials, run all the payments, and it automates the budget part of it. So there's this term called actualizing in production, which is the real invoices and receipts, and just so that you understand where you are at against your budget. And so what's cool is with our payments, the big unlock is as you're paying people, you're generating real-time cost reports inside of our app, which has never been done before in the industry. So that's kind of one of the waves of what we're thinking about when we're talking about how do you automate, how do you integrate, how do you kind of bring everything into one place and build your production management around some of these things. We've got some other cool things that I'm not ready to share yet, but it's probably a 2-letter word, and like has a big buzz around it right now. But yes, there's a lot of cool things that are kind of coming down the pipeline.
That's super cool. I mean, for the audience, we got to try a little demo on it already, and like I was super impressed because one of Love Movie Magic used it for many productions, but it still feels like software that's stuck in the early 2000s. And I'm a huge guy on a user interface. And let me tell you, Saturation has a very friendly user interface. And, one of my least favorite things is to take multiple spreadsheets and budgets and throw it around, and have it all in one spot is so unique. And I relate to you so much as a producer, because like clearly you were so frustrated and done, and probably all the different like how much money you spent between all the different softwares to have it all in one spot. It's like you saw a pain point in the industry and you are trying to fix that pain point. And that is just like, that's crazy to me.
That's kind of actually, it's cool because we haven't gotten a chance to talk about it since you did the demo with our team. So I'm really cool. It's really cool to hear that you felt that way. And trust me, if I didn't have to do this, I probably wouldn't have. It just kind of felt like nobody was doing it, and I waited at least 10 years for somebody to do something about it, and it felt like it wasn't going anywhere. So I was like, what, I'm going to take a stab at it. And it just so happens that like a lot of producers resonate with it, especially, you and I, we kind of have been birthed through the recent technological age of the internet and cloud-based systems and collaboration and all of this stuff, and I think that's what's frustrating about it, is because yes, there is an old guard or somebody that's okay with what a legacy system looks like, but that's just not how modern productions work, and I don't think that's how it's going to be, as the future of production is going to look even more different in the next 5 years than it did even in the last 50 years. And so there's some exciting parts about that, as well as some scary things, I'm sure, for a lot of people. But I'm truly excited because of what we can potentially do to be a part of it now more than ever. It's just like such a interesting time to be alive,
Now that you said you formally stepped back as a producer, have you personally used Saturation on like a production that you produced?
Yeah. Actually, crazy enough, when we first started Saturation, I was still running the production company as well as, trying to get Saturation off the ground. And so, like, some of the first projects were all actually done on our own projects. I didn't feel
Nice.
comfortable or, by any means to like say, hey, somebody else should try it or use it or like, be a beta tester if I couldn't do that myself. And we've run $10 million of our own productions through the platform on various projects. And it really did inform a lot of the initial kind of use cases. And really for the independent level, like, I made it with somebody like myself in mind. I'm not necessarily doing the big studio level features. I've been able to, I guess, be fortunate enough to have a career in the industry, but I've done everything from, $5,000 music videos to like, $2 to $3 million like features. And so to test some of that in our own app was a huge blessing that I was doing both. I was able to do both at the same time.
It's great. It's kind of cool to be able to like, be the beta tester, like you're the one that is going through the motions, because then you can in real time like flag it, as opposed to like having to hear feedback from people and then trying to make that change. You're like literally experiencing it, which is kind of nice.
Well, yeah, I mean, actively. I mean, our production company still uses it,
Yeah.
and so like I'm constantly seeing the real problems where we still need to go with it. I feel very fortunate because I think it's very different if you face the problem yourself and you're building something versus like you're seeing the problem from the outside.
Mm-hmm.
There's definitely a different perspective that I think that drives in how you build it, because I'm learning this because I'm first time tech founder, 15-year, producer.
Yeah.
Building a product is slightly different than building a film. A film, it's almost like you're building to a finite place.
Yeah.
You're building to this finalized version of this art form, and then it's forever going to live as that. In tech, it's the opposite. It's iterative. I'm building the lowest version of this, or the the worst version of this possible, and it's only going to get better over time. And
Or at least you
it's
hope.
it's a very different unlock and mind shift set. But what's interesting about it is if you were to tell me, and if I wasn't a part of the industry, this feature sucks, I might have, if I was outside of it, taken it very literally and just have probably optimized for what you were saying. But I, as the producer, hearing that you say that this thing sucks, I know inherently behind that feature why it sucks.
Yeah.
And that I think why it's resonated with so many different producers. We've grown pretty organically. We haven't really done paid marketing up until this point. And so I feel very proud of that. I say that just because I think it's been very for producer by producer. And I'm very proud that it's hundreds of producers that are like informing the product, and then us already being producers is filtering that with our own kind of feelings towards it and our problems that we've had with it, and understanding, okay, this is what we should build first and how and why. So yeah, I've been learning a lot through this process, but it's been so fun to kind of, like I said, to be the producer's problem solver is what it feels like.
I love everything
Totally.
you're saying about that, because I feel you're not a tech, you're not a computer science major who came in and is just trying to make a quick buck.
You're not a tech bro, is what he's saying.
You're not a tech bro. Nothing wrong with tech bros.
You're
I'm
a
just
film
saying,
guy.
like, a lot of the problems
Like
with a
us.
lot of industries these days is Silicon Valley coming in and just steamrolling it, and then letting that industry pick up the pieces. And we're witnessing that in the film industry literally as we speak. We are living it, right?
Yeah, that's
the
right.
Streamers, the tech industry, came in and just plowed through the industry, and now we are suffering the consequences of what they tried and are still attempting to do. And ultimately, I feel like a big reason why the major studios are struggling and having such major problems is because, I mean, no offense to their CEOs, but their CEOs aren't filmmakers, most of them, right? They are CEOs of a multi-million, billion-dollar company. And, the film industry is a business, but like Warner Brothers was founded by the Warner Brothers, and they
Mm,
literally were filmmakers. So they understood, even though it is a business, ultimately it is still an art form. And there are certain things as an artist and as a filmmaker that if you have that inherent passion in the projects, you will make money on it. Right. Especially back then. It's a little bit different now because of tech
sure.
and stuff like that. But like, especially back then, right? Good story, even today, will make money if it is seen and marketed correctly. And
Yeah,
so
I think even to your point around like, big tech coming in, around that time that was happening, it was just common to throw a lot of money at things and just operate for metrics, and like it wasn't necessarily always art driven or storytelling driven. And I think as a producer, that's, you have to be both left and right brained. You're constantly holding this tension or this tightrope of like, the business is mixing art and commerce together. Without commerce, you wouldn't have art at the scale that we have now, and without the art, you wouldn't have something to actually like give out to the world and express it in that way. And so when it can lean one way heavily or the other is where I think some of the problems end up happening. To your point, like some of the founding kind of companies
Yeah.
are original like filmmakers and such. But yeah, it's definitely mixed feelings because I'm trying to operate in both spaces now and seeing like
I'm
how
sure.
sometimes venture or tech works and
Absolutely.
operates is not always the same as like how like filmmaking and works. But yeah, it's so true, like what you're saying. Yeah,
You hit it right on the nose, especially with the producer standpoint, because especially like I'm working on a couple projects right now. Like Lot1 is producing a couple of shorts and stuff, and then hopefully
right on.
a feature at the end of the year. And when we're in script meetings, because we are in a buttload for multiple projects of script meetings, as the producer, my notes, I always really try to, because I'm a creative at heart, I direct also, so it's like I have my both sides of my brain, and I always try to give them both sides at the same time. So I'll say my creative side right now is telling me this, and this is what I think, but we have to be realistic. And the producer side of me is saying we can't do this because we can't afford it, or we can't do this because contract X, Y, and Z doesn't allow this or that, and so I'm just talking about more. I think the idea that a producer is creating a program for producers, but also not just for producers, ultimately it's going to be better for everyone across the board, because you understand as a film producer, the importance of that is huge. And so it's really interesting to see and hear someone who worked in the industry is now making such a successful program. And that's probably why your word of mouth is working so well, because there's been like a couple of like use cases of that in the industry of like, I'm sure that's how Movie Magic became Movie Magic, right? But
Right.
now it's an older program that hasn't gotten a whole lot of major updates, and they're probably going to regret it here in the future, and that's yeah. But like, ultimately, what is the goal of saturation? Like what is the end all be all for saturation? Where are you headed with it?
I probably had a very different version of this like a couple years ago, but just in the world today, you just never know like where it's going to be. I mean, our inherent mission statement is helping creatives stay creative. And so whatever we build, that is inherently going to be the root of it. So it could be, filmmaking related, or it could be largely in the just like creative industry. But yeah, I would say it's removing some of those barriers. Like, if it wasn't for, there's many of these like mini technological revolutions and cycles that kind of unlock a new generation or a new kind of group of people joining the creative industries, or maybe as a filmmaker. For me, it was the DSLR revolution. I don't know if I would be where I am today if the Nikon D90 didn't come out and video was able to be accessible at that high quality. I wish I had the story of like I had a Super 8 film camera, and that was that was just not where we were at, like as a family or anything like that. But it wasn't until that revolution that put so many cameras in the hands of young filmmakers like me that like unlocked a whole new generation to to being creative in their own right, or maybe evolving on their creative. And I hope to be a part of whatever that next unlock is. I tell people all the time, like, there's so many resources out there around how to be a DP or how to be a visual effects editor or something like that. But there isn't really a lot in the producer space or like the kind of production kind of oriented space. And I got lucky because I moved to LA and I was able to be next to a producer that was willing to take me under her wing,
Yeah.
that like I got the like, you know, level of information and access and like know how. But I hope, and I tell people all the time that like another version of Unlock was like Adobe free trials, like way back when. And I don't know if I would be doing what I'm doing today if it wasn't for that. And so it's why we even have like a completely free version of Saturation, is that I hope it's never a gatekeeper for somebody learning budgeting or somebody learning how to be a producer, because that's not my ideal customer. It's not the person that's learning, like, but I want to make sure that it's available to you to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a long-winded answer to say that, like, I hope we're part of whatever the next wave is of unlocking creativity.
That's awesome. Wow. I love that. And I just to kind of go back on a little bit on like the free aspect of it to then being able to do the $50 million, you know, project. I really like the idea that what you guys are doing is very scalable, and that sort of any budget can sort of benefit from just the platform that you guys have, because especially when you're first starting out and wanting to learn and you're trying to get better, like, you know, some of the high price tag, you know, budgeting softwares are out of reach completely. And so basically, I mean, you know, when I had a small company, like we were doing things off of like Excel sheets, and I had to like learn formulas, and I like Excel, so that was helpful. But like, you know, for anybody that's trying to do that and then like trying to then make it do the next thing that's a little bit bigger, it's like, you know, there's so many things that you have to like update, learn. You have to keep doing. So it can get complicated pretty quickly. So I'm happy that you have options for people who are just starting out to get in, and then once you understand the program, know it, then you can scale as you grow. The platform grows with you, you know, if that makes any sense. So.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, that's definitely an inherent value that we have with the company. I'm very proud of that. So that way, you know, again, like if you're a student or, you know, you're doing the short film or, you know, whatever it might be. And honestly, I think it's good practice for anybody to like do and be a part of, whether you're a director or, you know, what most people don't realize when they start in the industry, at least I didn't, was how important this was at every level in terms of financial management. It didn't matter if I was a PA, a department head, or a producer. I was still somehow touching receipts or managing a spreadsheet, or financial management was touched throughout. You think it's just the producer. No, everybody has to deal with this thing that nobody signed up for. And I tell people all the time that I thought I was becoming a creative, and I ended up becoming an accountant. And it's just like everybody has to touch it, everybody has to deal with it. And that's the thing we're trying to unlock, is that this idea that like a lot of this can be automated to keep your head in the creative space more and automate some of the like logistical stuff.
That's awesome. Well, I know we're running out of time here. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I do know that Chris has a special question for you.
Ooh,
so Chris,
shoot.
Take it away.
So I ask everyone this: if you had one piece of advice, and
it's not that special. You ask everyone this.
Never mind. But it's special to him.
Yes, this is true. I guess
if you had one piece of advice that you would give, let's say because you left producing, you're now tech. If you had one piece of advice just to give a filmmaker, maybe just starting out, wanting to jump in, or maybe someone who has an idea for a product that would benefit filmmakers as a whole, what would that one piece of advice be?
I think it maybe is simple, but just go do it. I think there's so much of like self-talk that kind of happens as to like why you can't do something or why you shouldn't do something. And all great ideas start with writing the first word on paper or on a napkin or whatever it might be. Taking it out of your head and actually physically placing it somewhere, I think is like the biggest unlock from an idea to start to grow. And we just live in such an amazing time now more than ever, where possibilities are limitless in terms of what you can create. You can speak it today, and an idea can formalize into something and turn into a product and so on. So whether it's a film or a product, I would say that that's true for anything. I can't tell you how many times that I had an amazing idea or I thought it was an amazing idea, and I just let it sit in my head, and then eventually either forgot about it or saw it on Shark Tank later, or somebody made that film or whatever it might be. And you're your worst enemy. So I would say just do it, start it, write it down, and you just never know if you can kind of synthesize big dreams into micro goals. You'd be surprised at how far you can get with something.
That's well said. Well said.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yes, thank you.
Dropping some good knowledge on the people.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Well, before we let you go, do you mind letting people know where they can find you and learn more about saturation and all that?
Yeah, my socials are Jens Jacob 24. You can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, all the places, I guess. And Saturation, you can go to saturation.io or the link below, and yeah, you can get started for free. We have a completely free version that you can do one project completely for free.
Awesome. That's great.
Awesome, dude.
Thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Jens.
Yeah, my pleasure. Can't wait to come back.
Yeah.
Let's
there
do
we
it.
go.
Let's do it.
All right.
Take care, guys.
Bye now.
Bye.
Later.
Hey, that's a wrap for today's Lot1 podcast. Thank you to our guest, Jens Jacob. If you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to subscribe and follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Huge thanks to our producer, Mina Vazarian. You rock, dude! Make sure to check us out on Instagram and TikTok at the Lot1 Podcast. That's the LOT1 podcast. And also check us out on lot1productions.com to see all the fun stuff we got going on. There's a few things that are probably updated recently, so go check them out. The film term of the day is martini shots, and that means that we're on the last camera shot of the day. So that's great. And you always want to be on the last shot of the day because it's such a great shot.
Absolutely.
Anyways, thank you so much for joining us on this episode, and we will see you next week.
All right. Okay. Good job, buddy. Go do your thing.
Sick. Thanks. Bye.